Welcome to the Living Consciously television show, coming to you live from our Denver, Colorado studios on channel 56 on Comcast, and as well as being streamed on the internet at consciousrevolutionmedia.com. I'm your host and moderator, Coach Steve Toth, and our theme today is how to open our mind to the extraordinary. And to cover that topic, we have an extraordinary guest today. His name is Simeon Hein, PhD, from Boulder, Colorado, right from our backyard. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here today.
It's good to have you. And our cast today is going to be Lynda Dyer, and she is part of our South Evolution cast, and she's joining us from down under Australia. Welcome to the show.
Beautiful, beautiful morning here in Sydney, Australia. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. And next to Lynda, we also have Tori Kaczynski. He's joining us from, I believe, from New York.
Yeah,
New York!
New York City, the Big Apple.
And for some reason, he doesn't want to be on cam today, so he gets to have his way. He's also part of our South Evolution cast, and thank you for being here, Tori.
Thank you. I've been a stubborn child my entire life.
That's what happens on Living Consciously. You get to display who you are. All right, so my first question for Dr. Hein is, what got you involved? I'm just kidding.
Good one, yeah.
That's an in-house joke, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, so I think what we should do for the viewers, it's really what's coming to me right now, is we should explore a little bit what are the different things that really stopping us as human beings to be open. And then perhaps once we get through some of those, then we'll have a better chance at maybe being open, because maybe we'll notice. Some of us will notice. I know I will notice, because I've been noticing, reading your book, that I can't sleep anymore.
Oh, good. I'm glad it's
Thanks
doing
to
its
you.
job.
Yeah. So what are some of those things?
I think the main thing for most of us, it's fear of going against belief systems that we were taught as children from our parents and organizations and institutions we're around, and we want to, we're afraid to question some of those, so we kind of stick with them. We kind of stick with the program. And the farther we get into adulthood, we're less likely to question them because of, facing ridicule from our friends and neighbors and so forth if we want to explore other topics, other sense of identity. And that can be an intimidating process for many people, and it takes a lot of real willpower and focus to want to go beyond what you were taught, the official party line, as it were, of what reality is.
Wow. I actually came to enjoy ridicule. Have you?
Well, now
because
I do,
now
but, it's an acquired taste. Let's
because
put it
now,
that way.
because now when I'm being ridiculed, I know I'm making a difference.
Yeah, sure. That's one way to look at it, yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the other things?
Well, what other things are, our minds and our brains have this natural tendency to be conservative and to want to form a coherent view of reality, right? And anytime we encounter an experience that pushes us beyond that boundary, there's a part of our mind that wants to snap back to the way things were. It's just a kind of a bias that our brains have towards keeping a coherent view of the world. So we have this external collective pressures to kind of toe the line with the way the rest of our society sees things, our peer groups and so forth, institutions, workplace settings and so forth. Yeah. And then there's our own brains, our own minds have a direction to keep us kind of on the railroad tracks of a coherent explanation. So if we encounter something that's going to take us out of that, there's a part of your mind that's going to rationalize it back to a more comfortable explanation. So there's internal and external pressures to keep us with the same set of definitions that we had as kids, basically. And that can be challenging because we experience things that don't fit. Increasingly, many of us have. And what do you do with those experiences? How do you explain them when they don't fit with the official version of reality you have in your head?
I speak up. That's what I do with it.
That's one way to do it.
And I've done it since I was 12. So it's kind of interesting because after reading your book, I began to connect dots that I have never been able to connect before. And let me just begin this with one example out of your book, which has to do with why humanity really designed the car. We designed the car to get from the automobile, to go from point A to point B, and to save time. And today, when I read this, I began to smile. And today, what we do is on a global level, we spend more time generating traffic with our automobiles than the actual amount of time that we're saving. Isn't
Right.
that craziness?
It really is. All of these technological innovations that we create over time initially seem like they're going to do one thing, but there are these unintended consequences of all of them once they become systematized on a large scale, which is actually to create more of a drain on our time than they actually save in the long run, the automobile being an excellent example. Initially, when the automobiles were invented, you could see, wow, you can get from point A to B faster. But now that we've redesigned our entire societies around automobiles, the whole thing is like one big traffic jam, and it doesn't seem to save time anymore for anybody.
At all, but we keep doing it.
We keep doing it because these things have a lot of momentum.
Because it's the way to go.
It's very challenging to change it once it gets moving in that direction. If we had thought this out initially, I don't know if we would have designed it the way it is. And I think of the amount of resources we put into roads and cars and so forth.
Very interesting. And I noticed several of these things throughout the entire book that I just went like, oh my God, and I immediately started to smile. And one of which has to do with technology. And believe it or not, I spent more than 2 decades in technology as a consultant. And I, underneath this work that I did, which really was just to make a living, a good living, and take care of my kids and my family and my ex-wife, underneath it, I hated the whole thing. And I don't know how much of that came out in meetings and things, but I used to do things like I came into a meeting and I was 20 minutes late, and I said, well, they were all upset with me, and I said, well, the meeting doesn't start until I get here.
Well, that's, yes, you can look at it that way.
No arrogance.
Yeah, it was very arrogant. But I have a different understanding of it now than I had before, because I feel after finishing your book, the bottom line for me is that I feel that I am being and getting ready to. I'm being directed, and I've been directed from the time I was born to do something in the world. And I'm doing it now, but it's taken a long time. It's taken most of my life. I mean, I'm 60 years old, so it's taken me 50 years of all the things that I've done to get here, finally.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Steve, one of the things, one of the main points of Opening Minds, I initially came to this from a study of interest in technology. How do we interact with technology? One of the main points is it has these unintended consequences, nonlinear effects that we've increasingly seen over the past
Let's give some
decade or
examples.
so. Oh, look at the financial crash of 2008. You have all these financial models that all these different institutions are using. When they're working on their own, that's one thing. But if the prices, everything slides in one direction, all of a sudden you get something called contagion. All these effects begin to compound on one after the other after the other. All of a sudden you see these huge institutions that are at the edge of completely going under. Those are nonlinear effects, unintended consequences. All of these systems that we engineer as human beings can interlock and intermesh in ways that we didn't intend them to do. That can have both positive and negative consequences.
Right.
The positive effects would be the other side. Think of something like the internet. It allows us to connect in new ways that never would have been possible before. And it can circumvent and overcome existing authority and institutions in ways that people didn't have access to in the past, maybe even 20 years ago. It's leading to effects right now that we can't even comprehend. So all of these systems lead in many different directions, including leading us to have contact with our own abilities and creative processes that we can now express with businesses and jobs and things that we can create online that we never would have been able to do before. So it's going in a very interesting direction.
It's also disconnecting us from ourselves, I'm noticing, because we becoming a slave to technology, to the computer.
It's complex. Look, it definitely takes a lot of our time. And one of the themes in Opening Minds that motivated me was looking at some of the negative unintended consequences of staring at a screen all the time. I think we used to be surrounded by nature. There's a big movement now towards things called green exercise. It's not just enough to work at your treadmill inside. They find that there are positive physiological effects of actually exercising around nature, just being around the outside, trees and so forth. So there are negative consequences.
And there's a rhythm.
Rhythm. I think of, the way we've been living as hunter-gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years. The way this is all set up is quite new for us as human beings. At the same time, this is where we are now, so we need to find ways to adapt to that and make it work for us.
Yeah.
And even the consequences of sitting too long in front of computers, just their negative physiological effects that you might have read about, just sitting for periods of time that's not good for your body. At the same time, you have to agree, it allows us to express ourselves and engage other people in quite interesting ways, watch videos and learn about things. People now have the ability to learn about topics and get an education if they have the focus to do it in ways that weren't possible 10 or 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, no question. I'm using technology every day, but then give an example. For example, there's a mother at home with a daughter, and the mother is in the kitchen cooking, and the daughter is in her room working on homework, and the daughter has something to say to the mother. Well, she's not going out to the kitchen to talk to her. She's going to text her.
Right.
Now, what's wrong with that?
There's a lot that's wrong with that. That's the disconnection that you're talking about. This is what we're seeing. I mean, people can be so
connected. This is an unintended consequence.
Yeah, and you see it in terms of people driving and texting. You see this all the time. We know this leads to many auto accidents and deaths every year of people using, the auto space within our cars. The cockpit has now gotten so full of electronics, it's distracting us from driving, creating dangerous situations. But what you're referring to is people being disconnected from each other, almost using technology as a way to distance themselves from other people. It can go in both directions, and I think what it requires, it's something that, this whole show is about awareness, to be aware of what you're doing, be conscious of it, not just be an addict to technology, not just make it another dopamine driver, in our brains. It's something we can't put down. I love using my phone as much as anyone else. But, there's times to put it away.
Yeah, me too. But it doesn't run me.
Good.
It doesn't run me. I run it, and I only pick it up.
I saw this myself just the other day. I went out for dinner, and this family came, and it was so lovely seeing all these people hugging each other. It's great to see you, and the kids. And the minute they sat down, the kids got their phones out, and they sat next to them, not with them, and they were just head down on the phone the whole time. And I went, wow, how sad is that? There was no more interrelationship between the teenagers and the adults from then on.
Yeah, great.
Exactly. Good example.
So let's talk about time, and let's talk about clock, because
I
think it's one of the things. It's kind of interesting, but 10 years ago, I have got rid of all of my watches. Like, you notice I don't have a watch on, and I never do. I have no use for time other than to be able to start this show and many other shows that I do on time, and so that I can meet people. It's the only use I have for time. Other than that, it's completely useless to me, and there is a tremendous freedom that I feel in not being run by the clock. I have a clock in my studio, and I took the batteries out. It's no longer running, and all the watches I have, I put them away in a box, and they're just there for history's sake. I'm not going to use them, and I'm never going to change the batteries in them. So what have we done to ourselves as humanity with the introduction of clocks and time?
Yeah, well, about 500 years ago, the Benedictine monks started using water clocks as a way to accurately have their prayers happen at 4 a.m. in the morning when they needed to wake up. And ever since then, the clock seems to have escaped the monastery and kind of invaded all of our lives, so that we have what people call the tyranny of the clock. Nanosecond culture, as Jeremy Rifkin referred to it. And it can be like a form of slavery, because several hundred years ago, you couldn't even measure more accurately than an hour, right? And it's increasingly got into this narrower and narrower time frame where we're all expected to be accountable to this almost unreal unit of time, the nanosecond, which may be real for electrons, but it's not real for us at the level of our experience. Right. The danger is it's pushing our bodies and our minds in this temporal framework for which we are not designed. We're based on diurnal cycles, long periods of time, day and night. Like you're saying, now we're expected to be accountable to this tiny unit of time. What it creates is a type of stress. And you can see it affecting people in many ways, many of which would be negative, even to the extent that people don't get enough sleep anymore because the devices we've created are working 24/7. We're not designed to work that way. We really do need to get 8 hours of sleep a night. There's no doubt about it based on everything I've read. But these devices keep working. They can keep you going later into the nighttime, earlier in the morning, and that can be a type of stress which really can kind of freak your brain out.
Yeah, so one of the ways I prove to the viewers, not just on this show, but on all the other internet TV shows that we do, is that when a show is really working, like right now, I feel really connected with you. And what's happening is, for me, time completely disappears.
Right.
I don't even care that the show's supposed to be an hour long, but then I'm experiencing it as just a few minute experience. I have no concept
I like
of
that.
Yeah.
That is so important what you just said. Mm-hmm. You're talking about the experience of transcendence. When we feel like we've transcended the space-time environment that we find ourselves in. I know that everyone can identify with this, and our co-hosts right now, right? This is such an important experience when you feel like time goes away and you feel connected to something deeper. Mm-hmm. That's when you get real creativity and real learning and that feeling of meaningfulness. I mean, it's a real thing. If we're too focused on these nanoseconds, and you're obviously aware of this because you got rid of your clocks and if you're too much focused as time is passing, you never reach that state. And without reaching that state, you don't really have that deeper feeling of a meaningful connection. It could be to yourself. It could be with people you're around. And that's what I feel we're in danger of losing.
But listen to this. I feel that I'm being designed for something. Because 10 years ago, I had no clue whatsoever why I got rid of the clocks.
Oh, yeah,
I didn't know.
But you're paying attention to a deeper...
Today, I'm connecting it. Now I understand why.
That is another important point. Steve, this is really critical what you're saying. These deeper level programs within ourselves that create meaningful lives and meaningful experiences for us in the long run are not something that we're conscious of. This is one of the things that I've learned. We can design all these external technological systems, but in the end, it's not what's driving things. What's driving things are some internal, deeper meaning that we have, the way that we're connected to the universe. It's very hard to articulate. But here's the interesting thing, and you just hit on it. You can feel it instructing you in a subtle way. You should do this rather than do that. It's a subtle feeling. It's something I've learned to respect since I've gotten involved in a lot of these areas that I wrote about in Opening Minds. And you'll find over a period of years, it's like, wow, that makes sense. I didn't know why I did that 5 or 10 years ago, right? But now I see the logic of it. In other words, there's an alternative logic to technological logic. It's another logic of transcendence, and it's something that people need to pay attention to, because I think if you don't, it keeps things on a very superficial, meaningless level that doesn't feel good.
Right.
Yeah. That's the way I'd say it.
So I wanted to get back to, just for a second, to information technology, because what you say is that information technology actually destroys information.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, we have been fed this certain set of ideas about information technology creating information. Information technology is never going to create more information than we have available to us with our body, minds, the way they are. The way information technology works is by cutting things down into bits so it can be digitized. But in order to do that, you have to smooth things out and make them accessible to machines. Packetize them, and that can have many effects that we didn't intend. And in the end, you can end up losing information. Again, if you're too tied into texting all the time on your phone, you're not going to pay attention to what's going on around you in your environment, and you're going to lose very important
your life
clues.
If you're in your car.
Yeah, you could lose your life. But think of that case with the Indonesian tsunami, I believe 2004. You had the Moken people and some indigenous people on the Andaman Islands, right? They see the water go way out, and they remember these songs that they heard the elders sing around the campfire, which had something to do with when you see the water go out, and you feel a little rumble, get to higher ground. They had no casualties because they were paying attention. The tourists on the beach who were texting probably and focused in like this had no idea what that meant when the water went way out. And so those people became casualties of the tsunami, right? But the indigenous peoples who are paying attention to a broader bandwidth of signals, not based on any technology, based on stories that they had remembered around the campfire, songs, they were actually songs.
Wow.
Escaped unscathed. So this is the important point to remember. This can be kind of a trap sometimes, and it can lead to too much of like an autistic type of focus, paying attention to the nanoscale, but ignoring the bigger picture. Sometimes we really need to pay attention to the bigger picture because that's where the information is coming to us from.
Yeah. All right, so I can't wait. I mean, I'm just not going to explore this anymore. I'm going to stop because I'm ready to go into opening our minds. And I want to do that by just have you explain to us a little bit that only about the difference between the conscious and the unconscious mind.
Right.
And that only 1% of 1/10, whatever the number is, 1/10 of 1%.
It's a pretty small fraction.
1/10 of 1% of the information. So let's say 40 million pieces of information that's coming to us every second, and we only actually consciously getting 1/10 of 1%. Is that accurate?
Something like that.
Okay.
It's 16 bits a second.
Okay, so
out of 40 million.
Oh my God! So what does that mean? What happens to all these other bits of information?
You know, Steve, 500 years ago or so, we had the Copernican revolution where we realized that the Earth was not the center of the universe and that we actually orbit the sun rather than the other way around.
And it's not flat.
Exactly. The same thing is happening right now with consciousness. We're realizing that our conscious mind is not the center of our lives. Far from it. Our conscious mind is aware of maybe a fraction of a percent.
Could we be prosecuted for this conversation?
That is a very interesting question because this does come up in court sometimes about whether people are responsible for their actions if such a huge amount of what motivates us is in the realm of the unconscious. I don't like to call it the subconscious. I think that's kind of demeaning to the rest of these conscious processes. It's another, I call it the paraconscious sometimes. But here's the deal, and you're pointing it out right now. We're only conscious of a fraction of the information that comes into our minds every second. But the rest of it's there. We need other ways to access it. It's there, but you're not aware of it.
But here's the thing.
Yep.
Okay, Dr. Hein, here's the thing. We created computers. We're creating them faster and faster and faster. Now we have processors, not single processor. We have dual, triple, quad. We can now process information so fast. Of course, we're never going to process. No computer is going to be like our bodies and our own systems. And for some reason, people are not realizing this. But because everything is being processed much more faster, but we're not keeping up with this speed.
And we shouldn't be keeping up with the speed. I think we're getting into very dangerous...
So what's the sense of having all this stuff coming at us faster and faster if we can only get 16 bits out of every...
That's exactly right. We're in danger of making those systems go faster than our own minds can keep up with. And I don't think we're the ones that should be keeping up with the technology. The technology should be adapting itself to us.
Because we're the master.
Of course, unless you want a machine running your life. And I'm really glad you're bringing this up, Steve, because this is another point where I think there's been a lot of propaganda from the information technology industries that somehow faster is better. Faster is not always better. Can you think of many situations in your life where you took some time to make a decision? How much...
Sex is one of them.
Yeah. How many times, how many experiences like sex and things like that are better slower than faster? Faster is not always better. And there are many situations, there's plenty of evidence to show that we make decisions better if we slow down a bit and we take our time. We're in danger of believing that faster is always better. You know, you can make mistakes faster too. There's times to put on the brakes and times to slow things down. And so technology has its place. But as you're pointing out, there's a big part of our minds, maybe like 99.99%, that we're not consciously aware of. And this is what we found from all the research. That part of our mind reacts slower. It takes its time.
Isn't that when we're getting information all the time anyway, and when we're doing everything fast and it's full on, full speed, quite often we miss the absolute accurate information that could have taken us to wherever we wanted to go in the first place. I've really experienced this in my own life, you know, by doing some work in China and curing myself of lupus. It's just about taking that message, taking that time to hear the message and to just sit with it, rather than when I was, you know, hyperactive and the ADHD kid that needed Ritalin, the messages were still coming, but I wasn't listening because I'm busy, you know, doing the conscious bit with my 1%.
Right, no, it's kind of a complex situation. You know, one point of view we have from this came from that book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. It's kind of a book in the popular literature, and he suggested in there the idea that there are certain experts who have trained their unconscious mind to intuitively recognize particular situations in their area of skill. In a blink, so to speak, they can intuitively understand something better rationally than an expert. But that's wrong. I think Gladwell got it wrong there. certain experts who are trained in a very narrow skill, like someone who's trained in evaluating art and statues, like he mentions in the book. Someone like that with many years of training and very narrow skill might be able to do that. For the average person, for many of us, things don't happen that quickly. You have intuitive impressions about people, situations, and events, and you take your time, trusting your gut feeling. Those feelings which come through us via something called the vagus nerve, which connects our heart and our brain, it takes time. It should take time, and that's why sometimes it's often better to slow down. And I believe a lot of the research shows that people are happier with the decisions they make when they use their intuition, but they don't rush it. And in most situations, many people can make better decisions that way. There's a whole book about that called Wait by an author named Frank Partnoy. It goes example after example why people make better decisions when they slow down.
Yeah. Well, what I'm doing these days is I made it very simple. It's like it has to feel good. Whatever decision I'm making,
that's a very good criteria.
It has to feel good. If it doesn't feel good, I just don't do it.
I think
How simple is that?
Good way to go. Good rule of thumb. That's about as complicated as it needs to be sometimes.
In the past, I can tell you that when I wasn't following this process, I would go like this. Oh, well, something is not feeling right, but I'm going to do it because, and I justified it.
Yeah, that's right. And that's when you start going down the wrong path, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You rationalize away from the feeling. You can trust your gut feelings a lot of the time. There are some cases when you might want to use other sources to check, double check. It's often very accurate. And this is something that we're not taught. We've been taught this rational, logical model of decision making. I think it's a lot of BS. In the end, people make a lot better decisions by following their intuition and gut feelings because this system we have is millions of years old. Nature kind of knows what it's doing, and it has all these redundant systems built into you. Do you know there are more neurons in your digestive tract than in your brain?
Yeah.
That book, The Second Brain by Michael Gershon. Our gut thinks. And it's a thinking you can actually trust if you learn to work with it. And you've had other guests on the show.
We are the fastest and the most complicated computer that ever will be.
Right. And these different.
And we take it for granted. People are taking it for granted. Like this is, So let me ask you. So who came up with this word human?
Human.
Where did that come from? Because I can't find out.
It probably goes back to some language 10,000 years ago where most of our languages went back to. But I don't know. Tell me.
I have no idea. I have Googled it. I have been searching for it. I cannot figure out who came up with that word, which is actually makes me somewhat believe that we're not human at all. Like, for some reason, this thing called human gives me the perception, and this could be just me, but check this out. It gives me the perception that we seem to be the standard that we compare everything else. So if there's a UFO, if there's an extraterrestrial, those are not humans, right? But I feel that we are, many times I have felt, and I feel right now, that we are not really human. We are extraterrestrials ourselves.
No, we are human because we're from the Earth. You don't feel a connection to the Earth when you're walking out there. You don't feel a sense of connection to what's around you, the birds and the trees and the creatures and stuff. I mean, we're all part of the same.
But we weren't always here.
That's quite possible.
So how did we get here?
That is a very good discussion if you'd like to move in that direction. But there's no doubt you and I come from the food we eat, the soil, the air, which is part of our, terra firma.
But this whole thing about even making love and creating a baby, we still can't do it any other way other than the natural way. We haven't been able to duplicate this design. I mean, this is a design. Don't you feel that you are a design and I'm a design? And it is so complex and complicated that we can't even deal with it.
We can deal with it. I think we can deal with it.
To a certain extent.
We've been talking about how to deal with it. You told me you get certain feelings when you make decisions. You get a good feeling. You found over the period of time when you override that feeling, it's usually not a good thing, right? So I think the system really works. Listen, honestly, I don't totally logically understand how evolution completely worked, and I think there's a lot of room, as you're hinting, for exactly the whole human story. I think there's a lot to be told here that we don't know about yet.
Okay, I do feel connected. That's probably another show. But let's talk about resonant viewing. which is one of your expertise. Let's talk about that. Normally, it's known as remote viewing. So I want to talk about some stuff that's going to kind of, most of our viewers will go like, they'll be challenged.
Yeah. Well, that's something that certainly challenged me. You know, in 1996, I took a course in, as it was called back then, remote viewing. And I took it mainly because I really thought that I couldn't believe that the average person had the capacity. This skill, as I was told at the time, gave us the ability to perceive information about people, places, and events at a distance, not using our physical senses, using our unconscious mind and other abilities that we can't completely identify, right? And at the time, I didn't think that the average person had that ability, but I was wrong. We do. I took a course in it. Within a few days, I was describing, drawing pictures of targets, and I actually went way beyond what I thought my own capacity was. Just another example why none of us even know remotely what our true capacities are. This is something I didn't think I could do. I thought natural psychics could do this. What I learned is everyone has this ability. It has something to do with our ability to resonantly pick up information from non-local, things at a distance. Yeah.
I didn't think that I was able to, ever in my lifetime, be able to quiet my mind, and I am.
Yeah.
And it blew me away. It's like all that conversation, all that noise, I can actually make it go away.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah. So tell our viewers a little bit more about really what happens. Like since you're teaching this, you must have lots of experiences. Give us one of the experience that you've had with remote viewing or resonance viewing that made you go, wow.
Usually when you do a resonant viewing session, remote viewing session as it was called, keep in mind for people that don't know too much about this, our modern knowledge of this comes out of a classified government program that was begun in the 1970s to create psychic spies. The program was declassified in 1995, and people in that program began teaching.
The Russian and us were motivated to.
It was a product of the Cold War to create other ways of gathering information, and they had these folks for 20 years or longer training them in these classified, programs, highly classified. It was declassified in 1995. I think it was on the Ted Koppel show or something. They came out with talking about it. Anyway, people like me started learning it from people that had either been in the program or they had taught other people. And usually when you do a session like this, you just start writing, and it's a certain technique for learning not to edit your thinking so much, to tap into the unconscious mind, and that unconscious mind taps into this larger matrix of energy information, the quantum matrix, whatever you'd like to call it. Usually when you do this, it's pretty subtle information that comes across. You don't know whether you're getting it right or wrong until you're done with the session. You look with the target, you compare. There are cases where you get what's called bilocation, where it's very strong sensory input and you actually feel like you're at the target site. And for me, one of the strongest sessions I ever did that felt like that was we were given this target, the destruction of the dinosaurs, to move our minds back in time to see when the dinosaurs were there and what led to their destruction. Now keep in mind, Steve, these targets are done blind or double blind. So when you're viewing them, you don't even know what the target is. You're just describing what comes to your mind at the time, writing it down. You find out later how accurate it was.
And this is being done just to prove that it's possible?
It's not just to prove it. There are people who have done this extensively, like Pear Labs in Princeton, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Labs and other places to test it and show statistically that this is real. But for the average person like you or me, it's just to show us that we have abilities we don't even know we have. And this is why I originally took it. One of the targets that I did that really kind of blew me away, so to speak, the destruction of the dinosaurs, I actually started doing the session. All of a sudden I see this beautiful blue sky, and I'm breathing in this air, and I'm thinking, this air, I've never breathed air this clean before.
So you had smell.
Yeah, it was this smell, and all of a sudden I see these creatures, with their long necks and swamps and things, and it was like, where am I? This is amazing. And all of a sudden I'm thinking dinosaurs. This is like I'm back with the dinosaurs. The monitor gave us a movement exercise to move forward to the next significant moment in time, and that was the destruction event. So the next thing I see is lots of dust, and the sky gets dark and so forth. This is kind of what you perceive during a resonant viewing session. And for me, since you asked me, that was one of the most astounding sessions ever. That was it. Just the feeling of being there. But I have to say, just so our viewers know, this doesn't happen most of the time when you do it. Most of the time when you do a viewing session, you don't know if you're right or wrong, and you write things down. Maybe you smell it or sense it. Maybe it's just a word that crosses your mind. It can come across with different levels of amplitude, but it's always a fascinating experience. Again, You were talking about the 16 bits that we're aware of. The other 40 million, you can tap into it, but you need certain techniques to, you actually said it yourself, to quiet your mind down enough to perceive it. Yeah.
So how do we relate this with the viewers to quantum physics and how quantum physics has changed everything?
Quantum physics has still to change everything because what it suggests to us is a very different reality than you and I were taught. When you and I look around the room, Steve, do we think we are around solid objects? That's what our senses tell us.
Well, yeah, but I am no longer that fixated on.
Well, you're pretty fairly educated, Steve. But I'm talking, if you just look at your senses, it looks like things are solid. And
the five senses.
Classical physics.
People have to have the five senses. Check, check, check,
right.
check.
And Newtonian physics that we learn in school tells us that we have objects that move according to certain laws and so forth. But quantum mechanics tells us that nothing's really solid, that everything is made of energy, and that it's fluctuating, and that it's not even the same when we're not perceiving it, that it's actually more like a soup of energy that's floating around, and that things, get this, things can be in 4 different positions at the same time, simultaneously. The same electron can be in multiple positions. This isn't something that our brain is usually used to perceiving. So quantum mechanics tells us that the way reality really works is very different than the way our senses perceive it, but that's exactly what things like resonant viewing show us, that we're connected to other people and places in ways that we're not conscious of. Because initially, when I started studying this, and I don't know how much our co-hosts know about this topic, they've probably experimented with themselves too, you don't think that you could describe something at a distance. I mean, if you'd asked me in 1996, Simeon, can you describe something that you haven't seen ahead of time that I won't tell you what it is? I would have said, no way. I don't think I could do that. But I could. And so could everyone else who took that course. And I've found most people, since I've been training people to do this, most people have some degree of ability. And there's some people who are very, very good at it for reasons we don't completely understand. And a lot of them ended up working in that program. But I've met some of them now, people who didn't know they had the ability. What that suggests to us, Steve, is that the way reality works in actuality is very different than the way we've been taught it works and the way we think it works. We're all connected to some degree to our environments in ways that our conscious minds don't understand. But the evidence suggests that that's exactly what's happening.
So are you really saying then, I'm trying to just read between the lines there, so are you really saying that our reality then is completely created and manufactured by our senses? Is that what you're really saying?
Yeah, for a variety of reasons, our brains and our physical minds are really focused on what's in front of us for survival value because, you know, it wasn't too long ago we were living on the savannah or wherever we were, and we had to basically focus on what's right in front of us to survive to the next day. But now that we're not in that world anymore, we have a little more time, and it's not, you know, moment-to-moment survival situations. When you have that relaxed time, when you can quiet your mind down, your senses can expand outward and perceive more. And that suggests that there's a part of us that's intrinsically connected to this larger field of energy information, but it's not something that we're conscious of. But when you do the session and you look at statistically at all these studies, you'll find that people are getting much more information than they would be if they're just perceiving it through their physical senses.
So it also seems to me that if we're going to give our viewers some suggestions as to what to do, it would be the opposite. It would be the opposite of what we're doing now.
Exactly.
Because what we're doing right now is everybody's running. I don't know where they're running to, but everybody's in a hurry to get somewhere.
Thank you. Yes, exactly, Steve.
And there's really nowhere to get to. We are already there. How about just slowing down? Yeah.
Can you say that again? It is so important.
Yeah.
That is the key. It's actually not doing more, it's doing less. You know, my recommendation to people just to start out is take some time in your life every day to slow down and to use your imagination and to be creative in a way that is not so rushed and so frantic and so hectic the way our modern lives have become.
So is it about believing in the messages, you know, like the messages that come to us? You know, as I said, we flick them off because we don't think we can do that. Our senses tell us that nothing in our psyche thinks that we can do that. And yet, they're absolute beliefs, messages that's what you are on the planet for. And I love living my life like that and just going, oh my gosh, I got this amazing idea today. But when I first started doing it, I'd get these amazing messages and I'd go, I can't do that, I can't do that. And we flick it off because of our senses saying that in previous times that wasn't possible. Whereas now I believe that, you know, when the messages come, I really want to give that some time. and go, okay.
Exactly right.
And whatever size it is, you know, like, as I said, the work I did in China when I don't speak a word of Chinese and believed that I could actually go up into an earthquake zone and go through an army and take my books, and it all worked. And I had everyone told me how it couldn't work. In fact, people said it was ridiculous. But I just had this inner gut that said, you can do that. It can actually be done. And I think what we do is we focus on the how, rather than, it's not our job to focus on the how, it's our job to slow down, take the message in, and just go, how can I make that happen? What can I do? What are the actions I can take to make that happen? And when you're thinking slowly, you can just do that. It just comes as a part, as Steve said, make sure you're loving what you're doing though. And I absolutely was loving every moment of that.
So, yeah, thanks, Lynda. So, I don't know if this is possible, but I'm going to take a risk because I take a risk every moment. And if you have that video that you showed me right before the show, that 1-minute video, if you could tee that up, that would be fantastic. If you have it. Until then, let's talk a little bit about, since we got Lynda on the show as well, she's from Australia. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Aborigines. And they have this thing called dream life. Talk to us about dream life.
Yeah, well, it seems many indigenous peoples were intrinsically connected to this type of intelligence. We think we've got information technology, but the real information technology was things like dream time, dream life, and kind of a natural, intuitive way of feeling connected to the bigger universe. That's kind of this broadband way of receiving information that we're so disconnected from nowadays. You know, the Aborigines had these things called the song lines, and they could apparently navigate the entire continent of Australia from songs. Now think about that. We need GPS to do this, right? We're so dependent on these devices, which is kind of a left-brained way of perceiving. They had song lines, songs that would navigate the landscape. It would tell you what you were about to encounter, and they could navigate the entire landscape that way. So this type of intelligence, Steve, that we're talking about here today, it's not just something that's dreamy and imaginary and impractical. It actually has a very practical application, is that people used to be able to navigate their environments and connect to their worlds in a way, you know, hunting, fishing, navigating, through these types of intuitive techniques that worked for them. Now we're so dependent on these devices, if these get shut off, we wouldn't even be able to find our way around town, right? I mean, I have to admit, I used my GPS to find the studio again, and I was here, you know, with you a couple of weeks ago just in the studio audience. So there's a danger of becoming too dependent on these narrow kind of left brain navigation systems.
Yeah, I think our video is ready, so thank you. So let's look at that video, and let's just check into chaos for a minute. All right, great. Thank you, Ann.
Is that why they call it Black Friday?
So that's Black Friday. And
do not do this.
I don't.
Just whatever. Do not act like that when you go into I don't know what store that was. Do not stampede when you go into
the one with the W.
Do not go into a stampede when you see those sale prices.
Yeah. So that's what we're capable of.
We're capable of a lot, Steve.
Yeah, I know.
That's the negative side.
That's the negative side. Yeah.
I've seen so many training people. I really feel fortunate, Steve. I launched out in this direction, teaching people resonant viewing, because I felt, wow, this opened my window to a bigger reality. I bet other people could benefit from this, and it has. I feel really fortunate to have been around people when they experience these mini miracles. When they go beyond what they think they were capable of doing. Imagine you think you have a limitation, and right here you do something that you thought you were incapable of doing. Describe something that was hidden in another room, and you go, wow, I just can't see how I did that. It's almost like being, you know, a little kid again and learning to walk for the first time or talk. Or that's the experience I've seen adults have. And it really renews my faith that, yeah, sure, there's a dark side, a negative side, but we have this capacity. I don't even think we have a clue of this capacity for most of us. And when you tap into this, you say, whoa, there's this deeper intelligence that I'm connected to. I'm for real. And I can just see that I did something. What else can I do that I didn't know I could do? Let's start exploring. Let's start pushing the boundaries. I think for the average person, that's a very positive experience. I just feel really lucky. I've seen that many times. I feel the same way.
It is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why I do shows is because I want to be able to bring this to people, the masses, and if anybody just gets something in any of the shows, just one person, I don't care, just one person and says, oh my God, I didn't know that I didn't know this before, and now I do, and now I'm going to use it to change my life. That's what I do this for.
That's how it starts.
Because information by itself, and this is again about information technology, information by itself does nothing, right?
It either does nothing or it can be used in a destructive way. I mean, the first application of information technology was in Hitler's concentration camps, where they used IBM punch card systems to keep track of the prisoners. That was the first mass application of information technology. It can go in a negative way. We can also access things. It's really our intention.
And IBM is kind of connected to that, right?
Watson had to give back his medal that the Germans gave him for helping them organize their camps.
Where is IBM today?
Yeah. But the thing is, the technology itself is neutral. It's how you use it, and it's with our abilities too. And for my part, I've seen it used in very positive ways, and I've seen people get very positive outcomes, like you're suggesting too here. And I know we can do it because I've seen it.
Oh, no question. Yeah, there's no question about it. So let's talk a little bit about fractals.
Yeah.
Tell us what a fractal is and
fractals.
Fractals.
Fractals are these.
Without being scientific, of course.
Yeah, no. We are all brought up in this linear type of mechanistic way of thinking about reality, that we can make everything fit a line. But when we look around nature, we look around the way nature designed things, we don't see a lot of lines, do we? We see a lot of curves, we see a lot of shapes, and there were these scientists and mathematicians, Benoit, Mandelbrot, and others, who realized that these objects have certain regular properties, and we can start working with them, and he called them fractals, fractured systems that look the same no matter what scale you look at them, like a mountain range, like our bronchia, even our hair.
It's interesting, automobiles began to get really curvy. Have you noticed?
Because everything...
From the boxy?
Yeah, because things eventually have to follow nature because nature created the ground rules. The farther we stray from that, we find the more these systems are less resilient. But the fractals... So
I wonder why Mercedes-Benz came out with a new, a brand new four-wheel drive that's as boxy as you could possibly think of. Have you seen one of those?
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, and I just smile.
Usually with fashion, it kind of goes in these trends back and forth. But they'll get to fractals. The reason is fractals are actually a very effective way to get information across. These JPEGs we have in pictures that we use online in ways of compressing information are based on fractals. They're actually very practical ways of compressing information. The fractals basically show us that there are other ways of looking at our physical environment that aren't based on a line. They're not linear. They're complex. It's actually looking at the things the way nature really works versus the way we're attempting to impose our naive, rational way of looking at things. And fractals are very interesting. They actually have tons of applications now, but back then in the 90s when I first started studying them, it was a different way to look at things. Not trying to fit things to a curve, let them be complex and find patterns in the complexity.
So let's talk about UFOs. Do they really exist?
UFOs absolutely exist because a UFO technically is an unidentified flying object. If your question is, are they visitors from other places, my feeling is absolutely yes. I was lucky enough to attend the citizen hearing in Washington, D.C. in April. I don't know if you or our listeners know about it, but it was 5 days, 30 hours of witness testimony, people from military, intelligence agencies, private contractors, who told 5 former congressmen and a senator that this is absolutely real. And I talked to some of the representatives later on. They told me they were blown away by the evidence. And it's looking like it's going to go into a UN conference on how extraterrestrials could be engaging the Earth right now. So I think it's a very big topic. It deserves a lot of attention And it's definitely something that's coming at us.
Well, why do you think the government is keeping all the information secretive, like Area 51 and others?
Not all the governments are. You know, at the citizen hearing for disclosure, as it's called, we got to hear representatives. People were sent from South Latin America, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile. There were people from China. Those governments are openly talking about it with their citizens. They have conferences. They invite people to come, and they say, the space people are visiting us, and so far we don't think they're particularly harmful. Why it's not happening in the U.S., that's a very good question. There definitely seems to be an iron curtain here. We thought the Cold War ended in the early 90s. Apparently, there is still a Cold War happening here in our own country, in the U.S., for those of us here, that there is like an iron curtain with the information. And the media won't talk about it seriously. Our government seems to be really afraid to talk about it. You know, President Obama has had a couple opportunities, and he's basically said the topic doesn't exist, even though we have thousands of documents. The government's own
Do we have actual ships that are stored somewhere?
We're told this by witnesses I've talked to that we have the ships. I've talked to people who have seen them, who don't want to go public, but they've told me they've seen that. Some of them have even told me they've seen living extraterrestrials. I can't verify this myself, but we have a lot of people who've been in the military, who've been in the intelligence agencies, coming forward to say, a lot of these are deathbed confessions that they've seen these things, going all the way back to Roswell. I can't quite comprehend why we wouldn't want to engage those people and say, well, what do you know? What did you see? They feel it's important enough to say it before they pass on to their kids. So there must be something about it that's very important, and I think we'd all be better off. You know, we were talking about the unconscious in the beginning of the show. If you have experiences that you can't completely process, your mind pushes it back. It doesn't go away, because we all know people with PTSD, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, people who've been in combat situations. It's much healthier to bring these topics out and talk about them collectively than to keep pushing them away. The UFO subject seems to be something, for whatever reasons, we could find out why, we keep pushing it back. All of our formal institutions don't want to address this subject. I bet all of us know people that have had these types of experiences, either seen something or something like that. It's not really healthy to keep pushing it away. At some point we have to engage it, and this is what China and these Latin American countries have decided to do.
Great. Let's talk about crop circles. What are they? Like, really?
Technically, crop circles are patterns that appear in the wheat. Now, I became interested, you know, these circles and so forth in different shapes. They become more complex over the years. I first became interested in this topic as part of remote viewing, because our remote viewing instructor gave us this towards the end of the class. And at the time in '96, I didn't even know what a crop circle was, but I felt, I want to find out what these are. I went over to England. You know, I wanted to get feedback on my session. And I became really interested in the whole phenomena, mainly because we found, for real, there were a lot of strange things happening right around this circle. You'd go in and your camera would stop working. You'd hear stories about this. You know, as a sociologist, at first I thought it's an urban legend. But I actually began to experience this going in with groups. Your phone would stop working. Your camera would stop focusing. Things would burn out. Batteries.
Disturbances. Electrical disturbances.
Immediately, you'd walk in, your batteries would die within seconds, maybe not work again for 6 months. I can't tell you how many cameras I've seen stop working in crop circles. And here's the amazing thing, Steve. We found it didn't matter whether it was made by an unknown source or if people had made them. We were able later on to identify people who had made crop circles. They were attempting to imitate the other ones, whatever eventually made that. Those would still affect our batteries and cameras. We've made our own experimental circles, paying the farmer. We got so interested in this to make one, and we would see these similar types of effects. So it's a very interesting subject. I don't know exactly why, if you put crops in a very symmetrical crystalline pattern, it affects our devices, but it does. It's an interesting topic.
Do you feel that there's a possibility that they're made by the universe, by energy?
Well, I have talked, that's a possibility. I was able to talk to a witness just 2 weeks ago up in Idaho who saw one of these form in 1978. She saw something form in grass, a meadow, a very coherent pattern in the meadow, in relationship, no joke, to a flying saucer. They were picking huckleberries. They saw this thing that she described as a flying tortoiseshell, round on the top, flat on the bottom. She didn't know what to call it back in 1978. And it whooshed down and left a pattern in the grass that was very coherent. The grass is all pointing in the same direction. Of course, she couldn't stay around because the military came up and told everyone to leave. So there are cases of flying saucers creating these patterns, at least back in the 70s. The ones we've seen more recently were created by people imitating that. But the whole phenomenon is pretty fascinating.
So tell us, what did you notice about you different when you were inside of one of these, feeling-wise? And we have very limited time, so.
It just causes you to really wonder about, you know, the extent of the complexity of the universe. I studied fractals since you brought them up in my dissertation. The first crop circle I ever saw was a huge fractal in a wheat field, and I thought, the last time I saw this, it was in a book this big, and they were trying to save printer's ink, so they left the middle blank, and here it is the size of a football field. It just causes this sense of awesome wonder and sense of awe, which is pretty neat thing.
Wow, fantastic. So guess what? The conscious hour is over. Did it feel like an hour?
That felt more like a minute.
Okay, so we haven't even scratched the surface.
We're just getting going here.
I think you gotta come back because we. This is like just the appetizer of I think who you are and what's possible to talk about. So, I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
And I want to thank, of course, everybody, all of our viewers, and everybody that behind the glass there making this happen, and people here in the seats. And tell me, what was your expectation coming here doing this show with us?
Steve, you really told me it was going to be more like a conversation, so I expected it to be open and honest, but we actually got much more in depth than some of these subjects than I thought we were going to go. So,
okay.
But you definitely exceeded my expectations.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, you exceeded mine too, but I already knew you would. I want to again thank everybody. Thank you for being here, coming into the studio. I know it takes something from Boulder. Usually, people in Boulder don't leave Boulder.
Why?
I don't know. You were awesome. Thank you very much. And of course, we're going to be back next week, same place, same time. Living Consciously TV. Thank you for being here. And go and interact with us on our website. And if you were touched, moved, and inspired by anything we did, please interact with us on our website at consciousevolutionmedia.com. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Ciao.